Okay, everyone, welcome to our noon book review. We're doing things a little differently than usual because we have two guests, Lanfranco Marcelletti. I've been practicing saying his name for half an hour now. So, and our director, Mr. Jaquay. They're going to be talking about this book, The Rest is Noise, Listening to the 20th Century by Alex Ross. And it was named one of the 10 best books last year by New York Times. It's been getting great reviews, and Mr. Marcelletti is director of orchestral activities at UMASS Amherst campus. I think Mr. Jaquay may have a longer introduction, but they're going to talk about this book, and they're going to be hearing little tidbits of music, and they're not going to be using a microphone, but they'll be loud enough. So thanks for coming, and here's Mr. Jaquay to do the second introduction.
Thanks, Joe. Welcome everybody to the book review that you've been coming to throughout the year. And when we were presented with the idea of having a review of this book, I looked at it and thought that perhaps it might work better if we were to have someone who knows about music. I do a little bit, but having somebody who really can talk about music. And I had met Lanfranco a short while ago when we were doing a program for the musicians of Melwick, where he was conducting a couple pieces in the area. And when I saw this book being talked about on Charlie Rose met with the author, I said, boy, I want to read this book. And I'd like to talk about this book, and I thought of Lanfranco immediately. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the book, because that's what we're here about, give the structure of the book, but also have a dialogue, conversation as it were, about some of the things that are revealed in this massive work. It's about 500 pages long, and it was written by an author who is the music critic for the New Yorker magazine, a young man with a wealth of knowledge. And it really is a comprehensive, I would say, exhaustive survey of music in the 20th century. Hard to believe we're looking back at it as, the past. And it was a time of lots of things going on, socially and artistically as well. And the author wanted to be able to sort of give a guidebook. It really is a guidebook, but make it very accessible to people who really not necessarily have any musical background. And one of the things that he does in this book is that he presents the case for music in the 20th century and makes it more accessible. And that's the objective, because I think most of us anyway think about it when we hear 20th century music. We go, oi, it's going to be discordant, it's going to sound strange, I don't like it. Okay, and if you've gone to a concert recently to Albany Symphony, you know that very frequently, if not always, there is a contemporary piece inserted in between usually what are considered traditional classic pieces, because it's a way to explore music that is not necessarily something that we're accustomed to. So his objective was really to be able to lead us into this comfortably. And one of the things that happened is he has an uncanny gift of putting music into words. He provides no musical examples at all in the book, and yet in his ability to do this, he sort of beguiles you to reconsider a piece maybe you've heard about, invites you into it, and oftentimes, as it was the case when Lanfranco and I were talking, you want to go to Amazon or whatever have you, and you want to get this piece of music because he excites you with this. And this is really very special with a topic I don't think that most people would normally, you might see it in the bookstore, and you probably would walk by it. So, that's how we're going to do this today. And one of the intriguing things is the title. And The Rest is Noise. And it really comes from John Cage, who says any noise can become music if you listen hard enough. Okay? And he juxtaposes that with the last lines from Hamlet, when Hamlet says, "The rest is silence." Okay? So there you have the framework of what he's trying to offer. And the subtitle is very important, listening to the 20th century. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Lanfranco right now, who's going to give you an overview of the book, and then we're going to then explore some of the main components of it. And fortunately, that's what we were working on before, we're going to be able to give you some audible examples so that you'll have a taste of what we're talking about. Okay? Lanfranco.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here. Can you hear me? Yeah? Can you hear me better? Yes. It's good because I have to know the level. I don't want to become noise. You know? So anyhow, I think the book is fascinating because, as I was telling Robert before, he can actually write a book that is good for a musician, is good for a music lover who is not a musician, who cannot read music. And it's a very good book for the person who never heard 20th century music and needs an introduction. But there is not an introduction made necessarily so technical, you know, that he talks a chord, but he enters trying to bring the historical element, the person's life, which actually matters a lot at some point. And then he goes to some pieces that he decides that are very important of this composer. So the book has 15 chapters, divided in 3 major parts, and he does the first one from 1900 until 1933, and then he does from 1933 until 45, after the Second World War, and then he does from 45 until 2000. So that is the way he essentially starts the book. The 33, I think the decision, 33 is actually has much to do also with Germany. In the moment that Hitler actually gets in the government there and becomes, you know, the chancellor. And from there is a lot of change that he goes on. There is a whole chapter actually talking a lot about Hitler and the whole thing about Germany and how that influenced not only Germany, but influenced all the world, because also if you realize Italy came Mussolini, Spain came Franco, it's a time in the world that a lot of, it changed the political situation. It also changed the music and the way people view. So it's very interesting. And of course, 45 is the end of the Second World War, which I think probably is the most radical change in music. I think it was already in the beginning of the century radical enough, but you still go to the concert halls and you hear Ravel, you know, you hear actually Richard Strauss, which much played, and still it's a language that we can relate, Debussy, we can relate in some way. But the Second World War, after that, it becomes really radical, you know, the way people will approach sounds. I won't even say the word music only,
right.
But sounds, you know, like when Cage said that each noise can be music if you listen hard enough. It's actually a notion of sound, more the notion that we have about music, that we put a CD and we can dance or we can sing or we can just listen and give us pleasure. And I think these words actually he makes us a little understand, and that was, I totally agree with him. When he sent me the book and I started reading, I said, I just want to listen to everything, you know. I would go and buy, because there are a lot of music I never heard, a lot of composers I never heard, a lot of expressions I never heard. Actually, it was a lot of things where, being a musician myself, it is very gratifying to read the book. But I was thinking while I was reading, can a person who doesn't understand about music read the book? Yes. Yes, of course you jump one or other thing that can become a little technical, but that was the compromise he had to do in the whole book. He really knows what he's talking about. So that is the fascinating thing. And he's a young guy. He might be 40 or something like that, but it took 10 years, no, you told me?
It took a decade to write, right.
To write the book. So I think that is something very important. So, yeah.
Okay, and in the first part, it starts in 1900, and we're referring to in the first chapter to the golden age. I'll call it the pinnacle of Romanticism, the epitome, the culmination of all that went before it to come to this sound that was sort of deemed complete. And we talk about Wagner and his contemporaries as well. So in that context, I think it would be good to understand what was happening, what was this all about in terms of music and composition?
Well, I think the person who really started to challenge everything that was before, the Beethoven and Schumann and Mozart and everything, the person who makes a lot of people think is Wagner. When he arrives, he starts to have first this idea that people would write the opera was like not only an opera. He would write the libretto, he would make the staging, he would write the music, he would do everything, what they call in German the Gesamtkunstwerk. But he, I think most important, he started to doubt where we should go in music, in sense. All music, as you think, goes to some place. There is what we call a cadence. When you sing, there is the end of the song. And Wagner started to think, do we need really an end? Do we have always to be finishing things? So he creates a language that has an end, of course, it's still in, but he starts to bring elements that are very, sometimes you listen and say, you don't know where I am, which I have to be honestly, Beethoven already brought the idea in the very late quartets of Beethoven. When you hear, you don't know where you are. It seems actually new music. So the idea, you have to realize that these ideas were there. It's just a society was not ready to receive them. That's why I always talk about what we live today, about the noise of the new music, was always there. It's just there was a society not open to absorb it. And that I think, that's why I think evolution is such a very difficult word to talk about music. And actually Cage say at some point, today there are so many streams that maybe we are a bunch of rivers going to a delta, and no, not anymore to a delta, to an ocean, and maybe not anymore to an ocean, to the sky. So there are so many things today that we accept. But at that time, Wagner brought this idea, and after Wagner, there was a bunch of people who really worshipped him as a god. And the people at the beginning of the 20th century is people who has anyhow a history with Wagner. Either they hate him or they worship him. So there was no middle way. And then comes, I think, it's very important, for example, if you hear melody and Wagner still brings that, it's something that you can right away say, well, I can still listen to that. But I would like to bring a little music example. I won't tell you, maybe some of you know by whom instead, and already see, oh, I actually didn't want that. That's actually a nice one. Well, you see, that's the beginning, that's actually the beginning of the book, which was my mistake here. Forgive me if I can find where is the Debussy one that we just heard. But
second page, I think.
I think it's the second page. But anyhow, what I would like to bring you here, yes, here it is, thank you, is this music was made by a person who worshipped Wagner, and then he said, no Wagner. Do you know by whom is that? It's Debussy. But you don't already hear more melodies. Can we put a little louder that? Maybe, I don't know. Yes. See, there is already a sense of rhythm, that everything is very quiet. Sounds are very long. It's like you are painting. We have a lot of painting around here. Like we are painting sounds. You don't hear more melody necessarily. You see, it's sounds. It's crystal sound, actually. And what I want to bring Debussy in that, because Debussy is already one who will create a lot of new people to start the 20th century thinking, where music's going? Where should we go? Because he already brings a new idea. And then the book starts with a wonderful chapter about a performance of Elektra.
Salome.
Oh, Salome, I'm sorry. Elektra was my first Strauss opera that I went to see. And I have to say, I was 18. When I saw, I couldn't understand anything. I said, what is that? It was such a horrible piece for me. And I heard probably 10 times, 8 times, and then I start to actually say, oh, wow, that's a major piece. But took me a long digestion. Do you know, it's this kind of food that you eat and it takes 2 days until you digest. So, but it's great food. So the Salome, I think he brings in the book Salome. It's not only because Salome starts with a very strange scale that nobody really did, because he put a scale with two keys that normally you won't bring together. It's so fast. That was actually what I play you today, that it just goes very fast. But he starts with this scale, like starting the book with the scale. But I think the big thing about Salome is not only the music starts to be very daring, the story is very daring. All this sensuality, sexuality, you know, this woman who actually seduces a man to have the other one killed, and then she starts to kiss a head of a person, a dead person, they behead, and then she starts to kiss in the audience dead. When the opera was done here in New York, there is a beautiful doctor saying here that this music was sick. You should just not go sing this music that was sick. Was not so much the sound of the music as much as the thing in itself. And that opens a century. That's a century that will be, there will be a lot of aggression. Also in music, the sounds, there will be a lot of aggression. Well, it's a century with 2 world wars. It's a century that we haven't stopped still the wars until now. There's a lot of aggression, and it's kind of the music preview that.
Do you want to just play that once again? Because I
Yes,
think we got it lost.
I would love to play that. And I think there is one thing that, just listen, it goes very fast. The very beginning. This scale is a very, the clarinet make this scale. It's a scale that already people heard and said, and then now he's in an old style. But constantly in the opera, he brings these conflicts that people thought at the time. Mahler actually said, if there was anybody, Schoenberg later says in the book, you will read that, say, well, if there was someone really revolutionary in the 20th century, was actually Strauss. My goodness, Strauss today for us is Bach, comparison to everything we read in the book. But at that time, I don't think it was just the music as much as how he dealt with the characters, the story. And there is another thing that was amazing that Mahler comments later. He says, can we be famous and still be liked by the audience? Can we be a genius but still be popular? So this question, it's actually a question that will be very important in the whole book. Because when we get in 45, people really don't care who is listening. You know, I don't care if you like or dislike. Or, you know, there is a very interesting Berg when he did Wozzeck. He had, I think it's Wozzeck. It was Wozzeck or Lulu, but I think it's Wozzeck.
Wozzeck.
He had this huge success, and he went on depression because he didn't want people to like the piece. And he goes out with a friend who stays hours with him and say, but don't be sad. Actually, people like it. They cannot like it. They cannot like it at all. So the idea of genius and make something that was important, I don't say better, but important for them and true, with the idea of being popular, which happens with Brahms. Brahms was a popular composer. You know, even Bruckner, Paul Bruckner, who is actually he was a popular composer. Well, if you think Beethoven was a popular composer, Mozart was a popular composer at his times. Of course, they wrote things that people didn't understand first, but they wrote things that were a real hit. You know, Mozart with his opera was beloved by everybody. Mozart was Beethoven was the first composer who, when he was invited by a nobility, aristocracy, he would arrive late by purpose because they should now wait for the musician, not the musician waits for the rich one. So they were popular people. And then comes a person. 20th century will be always the question, is music made to be heard, or is music made to follow the development or the evolution of humankind? Is that why we do music? If I do that for you I invented something, okay? I brought the use of something that's everyday and make sounds, and maybe I'm creative enough, like I think it's Ligeti or Varese, who does 100 metronomes concert. So he put 100 of these metronomes beating on stage, and then each one fades because he didn't give the same actually chord to every. So you hear this plop, and it's slowly until rests only one. I have to tell, I heard that. It is fascinating. Now, do we want to say that is like an aria by Schubert? That's not the comparison you should think, because they were not created for that reason. The idea of entertainment in music was an idea that was very strong because musicians were hired by church and by rich people to provide entertainment. But then there was these great people that are intelligent enough to provide entertainment with being genius. Great, like Mozart, Haydn, even Beethoven for that matter. But Brahms need money from the concert he and now 20th century get to the point, for example, I think it's Cage and Reich, they never got a job. They would actually work as a taxi driver.
Yeah, Reich and Philip Glass actually were taxi drivers
Glass.
and developed their own moving company.
Moving company. Do you know, so these people said, I'm not here in the game to make money with my music. The music has to have no compromise with people because the music is whatever they thought was music was, but its own way. I have to have an expression, and my expression is that.
One of the things that, with setting the Wagner, as sort of like this moment in time, and you get Mahler and Strauss very prominent in the first thing. Is it what was the drive? What is the drive that says, all right, that's been done. I need to be different. Is it individuality? Is it why can't you sound like somebody else? Because you need to be an individual, you need to express yourself, or is there something inherent in you that needs to come out?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question, and we talk about that also the first time we met.
Right.
And now he asked me today, I was thinking these days, I think there is much to do again with the time we live. We lived in a century, in the 20th century, that people were supposed to be individuals, no more groups. So true that when Russia gets with Stalin, very, very strong, Stalin tried to put a limit in the musicians, so all the musicians would have one goal. So you go against individuality. But in the democratic, let's put it this way, world, that's what you look for. That people has a voice. That's why we vote. If we don't have a voice, we might as well not vote. The same thing is incredible. There is a whole chapter about Stalin when he gets the power, and Shostakovich, Shostakovich trying to be exactly as you say, expressive and individualist, but respecting the rules of Stalin.
He had no other choice.
He had no other choice. And, or even Hitler, the imposition that Hitler put later, at the beginning he pretends that music is free, but of course he puts later a lot of imposition, and people, in order to be part of the group, had to express in a certain way. But the 20th century, especially Europe and United States in that sense, promote the idea that you are free to say what you think. Don't think that these people had the same background. I was just talking, it's fascinating to see the background. Some of the people has the worst background that you could have. Parents that were crazy, or that were killed, they lived on the streets, or then you come people who came from a very rich family. The backgrounds are very different. I was trying to find a psychology, a Freudian way to explain why a person wants to first have an expression, and why this expression. There is actually a violinist who came from Europe here, and went to Alice Toole. I think that there was the major woman who, Alice Toole Hall, that they gave a lot of... Tully, I'm sorry. My English, you have to pardon me. But he got there, he played something, and he broke the violin. Was a part of the music to break the violin. I imagine how many violins you had to have to repeat the piece. But that's the set of mind, you know, that you could do. And I have to tell honestly, I don't know. I think when we read the book, we really want to listen. I don't know if it's a music that you can listen for pleasure, but you can witness what mankind can do and where we are going.
Isn't part of what the book offers us, though, is a way to approach music? I mentioned this before, but it gives us enough insight so that when we go to it, we start to understand it. And, you know, there's this whole idea, I mean, really fundamentally, that art is to be, you know, you experience it. You know, do we have to understand it? Do we know what the artist is doing and all that? But we tend to repel that somehow sounds differently, looks differently from us. So the device what he's able to do in this book is to give us just enough key points to enter. And aha, you're right. Now I see. Oh, that's what it is. And so all of a sudden, something that you would have turned the radio off, you want to turn it on and listen and experience it.
Yeah.
And now it becomes music.
And it becomes, I think you're right, also one thing that you brought up that's very important to remember. I think some of this music were to be experienced live, not on a CD. You cannot really see 100 metronomes in a CD. Do you know? I think you can hear the metronomes like blah, 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 but I would not stop my day, be honestly, to listen 100 metronomes playing, but I would love to see 100 metronomes on a stage and experience that and see what that sounds. The curiosity of that, I think that's what the books help us, for me, is to create the curiosity experience. And the thing about understanding, of course we understand Mozart, and of course people understood Mozart at that time, because there is a language in the writing music, that kind of music before. That's a language that seems very natural. In one part of the book, he explained, I think it's Messiaen who says that music was made, they call the overtones. You know, you have a note, you can't hear these notes, but when you play a note, there are other notes that come together. Every note brings the overtones. The whole idea of tonality, chords to accompany, can be linked to the overtones. So we can explain almost tonality as a scientific language that is already there in our ears because it's part of nature. Of course, noise is also part of nature, but the dissonance put something that's not part of these overtones against something that's overtoned together, is that creates disconcerting for us.
In the whole evolution of this, when people stepped away from what was considered traditional, I would use the word traditional, they still used the forms and the sounds that people could relate to, but they changed them. They changed the rhythm. They did something different with the punctuation. They added things that perhaps were not heard before. So they were still working in the comfortable framework that they had all been trained in, right? That they had gone to school, and these were the things that you cut your teeth on musically, and still do, I think. Even the more contemporary ones, they all had this background in classical music. Okay, before 1900. And yet what they dared to do was to shake it up, okay? Shake it up and be individualistic, expressive that way. And I think one of the key examples, the book tends to take certain composers and really concentrate on them. And the first one I think we really talk about at any length is Stravinsky. Okay.
Just prepare here.
Okay.
A little. I'm sorry if you hear the click, but it's a noise, but it's the click of the computer. So again, what do we deal with that? It's fascinating. This. It's also fascinating to go to a concert and see that.
Plus they added the element of dance
Yes.
eventually to these kind of things as well. So you got the rhythm of dance, you got the sound, and it all sort of works together.
It's very funny because that's the Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. And again, you hear here essentially rhythm, which was made for a ballet. I think was made for dancers, this music.
Yes, it was.
But it's fascinating because this kind of that actually was very funny. Diaghilev, who was the director of the dancers, when heard the musics, and you never have a steady step. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3. Never the strong one. Until now we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's the waltz, or 1, 2, 1, 2, a march. But here you have 7. Is no 2 or 3 or 4, and every single measure. And he looks to. That's in the book. He looks to actually. Stravinsky said, "Does it last too long?" And he said, "My dear, it lasts a long time." So it was very difficult to stage that with dancers because dancers were not used to have a strong step all over. How to say, in different moments. That was not a repetitive thing like before. I think Stravinsky brings the idea of rhythm, which is still with some melody inside, but still the idea of rhythm, which eventually other composers will take the whole melodic idea and use thus the rhythm. See, I think that's actually would be nice to say the three people that are really the book brings as a as the
significant focus.
Folks, yeah, I was think doing bread. Bread, you need water, flour, and something else probably. Yeast. So these are the three that makes the bread for the 20th century for him. First is Stravinsky, and then Schoenberg. And the Schoenberg for me is an interesting chapter because Schoenberg actually, I think he brings one thing that is fascinating. He breaks with the whole idea of tonality, of chords, and he starts to use pitches. So while Stravinsky goes for the rhythm, which Stravinsky lived long enough to change many times in his life, he is a guy who very young became extremely famous, and then didn't know where to go. So he went everywhere. Every 10, 15 years he would change. And he would say, who is doing what? Let me try. And he lived from, what's this here? He's from 86, I don't remember, but he goes until 1971. So he almost lived the whole century. And he was active until the end. So it was an amazing man. But Schoenberg, who also lived for a long time, he actually brings something that I find that is very important. He brings now the idea of play with pitches, not rhythm. So I will take some pitches and I will create a music with that. And the pitches has at the beginning was called atonality. There was not an idea of either being tonal, because you are atonal, but this atonal was a little lost. He said for some years he was looking his way into that, I think, until he created actually a rule, which can speak the 12-tone method. He created a method, but it came, why he started to be atonal in 1907, the method came just in 1923. It took a long time, and that's everything in the book. It's very nice because he speaks about Schoenberg and Stravinsky throughout the book. Throughout the book they come back because they inspire a lot of people. So I actually would be nice for us to hear some of the orchestral piece, one of the orchestral piece by Schoenberg, which is not still 12-tone, but is very atonal. See these pitches. Even if you see there is a lot of beautiful phrase there. You see, there is of course the element of rhythm, but essentially why Stravinsky bring like a bunch of notes and pa 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 pa. He even doesn't change notes there. Here, he changed notes all the time. And what is probably, I think he's the most important, as important as in Stravinsky, but in the book, Schoenberg becomes really like a stone.
He does become a stone. I mean, the Schoenberg references are complete throughout the book. You realize how significant he was to many people and to the whole evolution here. Really focused significantly on this.
And musicians create a third way to be when they went against Schoenberg and Stravinsky. So they.
Interesting, I was going to note that when you listen to that fragment right there, you hear this discordant sound, and yet there are moments when you're kind of pulled back into this comfortable place. It's like you shake you up, and then you go, ah, shake you up, and then you kind of thing, And so you never really can settle in, and yet if you really listen to it, it's quite engaging.
Yeah, and I think it's the way that we put ourselves to experience this music. That's the most important thing. I was telling him what is difficult about music. See, there is a lot of painting going on in the whole 19th century, that creates 1,000 schools of painting, the same as music. People invented a new way to paint every 5 years. But when you see a painting, and I love to go see painting, and we have a lot of paints around us here, you don't have to stop in a painting and actually look at the painting or really see. You look, if you dislike, you go on. But music, you have to sit there and experience in a different way. You cannot move because you have to listen. And you cannot have an idea of the whole thing until you get to the end. While the painting by itself has a beginning and an end when you look. Of course, if you look more and you study, you are able to appreciate more because you know the nuances. In music, nobody's giving you much that. Nobody can sit with you while you listen and be telling, now listen, do you know what I mean? We can do this work ourselves. But music, some way you should get there and listen. And this experience is more difficult in some way than the watching one.
I often think when I'm in a theater, let's say the opera house, and I know what attracts me, and I'm being absorbed in what's happening, and yet I have no clue that the person next to me is experiencing. They're all there, presumably to see this particular work, or else it's just their subscription and they happen to be there that day. But what are they feeling too? Because it's so personalized. It really is. It's we all kind of make in the end of Rosenkavalier. We all love that end of Rosenkavalier. If we don't, I think there probably is. We have to question what's going on with us. And so probably there's a similar experience. But when you experience a totality, you really don't know what moment. A little phrase in Bohème, for instance, will grab me every time. I don't know if it'll grab you or not. So it becomes so personalized. It's such a wonderful thing, and yet we'll never know what it really does to everybody.
I think that's very true in all art, and especially this one is very personal. Actually, all the ones are personal. You're right. I think everything we experience is personal, which I think the book helped me is to become in some way personal, but have something to grab that makes me a little interesting to experience the thing without not so much a prejudice or preconcept. No, I won't like it. I can't hear that. And that is actually something very important. Because I think what is for me amazing, and I have been talking during these days since I have been reading the book more and more, is how these people in the 20th century had these ideas. How did they come with those ideas? And how they fought for those ideas? They really believed in those ideas. It was not like, they go for it. And I just find fascinating for myself. And I'm not actually questioning here if I like or dislike, because I might even dislike.
Right.
But I find fascinating that we lived in a moment in life that so much was done to take us to such an extreme, which I think, and I agree with Robert, he told me, we haven't finished the circle. The full circle is not yet finished. I think we are still looking. Composers today, I was telling him after I read the book, I always think I would love to compose something. If I sit here and said, and now I compose, many questions come in my mind. Do I use instrument or I use electronic thing, acoustically or electronic? Do I use the normal instrument, violin play with a bow, or I can use the violin play? There is a wonderful YouTube, a violinist who gets something that you do milk, just to foam milk, and he puts in the violins and create these sounds. And I never heard that sound in the violin. That's fascinating. Actually, some comedian that actually take the instrument and they also prepare a piano and play the piano with a piece of glass inside, and they plug the glass and the thing jump, and there's all these sounds that I never thought I could get from a piano. So do I use these sounds or do I use the common sounds? Now when I decide all that, how do I use the sounds? Do I group them in a tonality, like scale, a C major scale, or I do, for example, at Schoenberg, what I want to talk about, the 12th tone, had this idea, if you see in the piano, from the note C to the next note C, there are 12 steps, 12 keys. So what he thought was, we get the 12 keys, we create a roll, a series. I start with F sharp, D, G natural, B flat. So I create a roll that use all the 12 pitches. With this roll now, I can play. That will be my key. That will be my scale. So what I do with this roll, I use the roll, first rule, to use the roll always in the order, from one pitch to the last. Doesn't matter if the order is linear or vertical. So you can create a chord with those pitches, and you can create the order. And then what you can do with this pitch. Now let's start from the back to the beginning. Do a retrograde movement. Let's do actually what's the other one that you...
The inversion?
The inversion. For example, if I do do, re, I could do do, si, and invert the whole things in the intervals. And then you can make a retrograde version of the inversion version. So you have all these tables. Actually, essentially, it was a table on the table. He put a table of rows and say, I can use this row now, and he would check. Oh, now let's use the next row. And apparently, there are pieces that he wrote in very short time, and the book says that because he just make an idea of the piece, and then he create the rows, all the possibility that a row could give you, and then he just composed using these notes. Probably he never heard the piece, until it was really played, because was actually what was made there, what was respected was the roles of pitches.
And I think one of the things to underscore also is that, this isn't necessarily random, although it may sound random, that it's absolutely structured. It's mathematical. It has a form to it. You can analyze. You can totally analyze the piece. Is it the cage work, I believe, where you have somebody who comes on the stage, sits down at a piano, doesn't do anything. There's several movements to it. And the way you differentiate between the movements of nothing is to open and close the piano.
Oh, yeah, now, it's called 4 minutes 33 seconds.
Right.
That's the name of the piece.
But
you sit there for 4 minutes.
You know exactly, you know exactly when to open and close the thing. So.
And actually, I have a very one. I don't know if I will find, but there is a piece made by a very radical composer, and the piece essentially has just a line. It's like two boats hitting each other on the ocean. That's a piece. That's the score. It's 3 pieces here that I would like to show you. It takes just that, and that's the whole piece. So I think the idea, but on the contrary, Schoenberg was extremely scientific, and his idea then perpetuated later with 2 students, Alban Berg and Anton Wozzeck. Weber. Anton Wozzeck. Anton Weber.
That's Berg's opera.
Well, it's the 3 A's, because it's Arnold Schoenberg, Anton Weber, and Alban Berg. All start with A, the first note. Well, the 3 A's. They were students from Schoenberg, but they brought really things in very different direction a little. Berg wrote operas, for example, which was very difficult for Schoenberg. He wrote, but I think, and almost impossible for Weber to write opera. He wrote because he tried using the roles, using that create lines that are very singable. And when we hear Wozzeck, again, which I think you should go see, not just
Absolutely.
listen. You have to go see the opera. It's the fact that you understand very well what they are saying in that style. You really understand very well. And Berg was wonderful about writing lines that not only atonal, but they had the whole side. That was the thing. When Schoenberg created the method, he said, thank God, because to be atonal was almost being chance. I was doing by chance, and now I have a method. I have a harmony. You know, harmony for us is the method of creation, and he created his own method. And not only him, the 20th century, I think at least 7 people will create methods. Hindemith will create his own method. Messiaen will create his own method, how to write. Messiaen was amazing. Messiaen was this great organist, French organist, amazing man. There was a very religious part in Messiaen. He was a very, very Catholic person. And he wrote a lot of actually religious pieces. But he created a method that was fascinating. He not only chose the 12 notes, which in his case doesn't have to be 12, could be 6, could be 8, could be 20. Each note would have a register. So every time you play a D, will be that D in the piano, not another D. They have a rhythm. This D lasts pa, and then the C lasts boom. They have an articulation. They can be long or short. They have a duration, and they have a dynamic. Every time you play a D, the D will be piano. Now, every time you play the G will be loud and will be short. So he gave to every single pitch a life. So it's like I would tell here, you will say a sound that's long and lasts 1 second, and it's loud and has to be high. I give you now a pitch that's low, very short, but lasts just half seconds, but short, until you give the next one. And he creates that thing, and it's fascinating, his method.
I was just thinking as you were talking, you know, do also appreciate the fact that if you're in an orchestra playing this thing, it's hard work.
Oh.
You know, you have to be so attentive to the conductor and what's in front of you because it's so precise.
Yeah. And one thing I have to say that I show him, then comes Boulez. Boulez is French composer who was a student from Messiaen, and he comes essentially after the Second World War. And Boulez is radical. He's still alive. I love the man. I went to many of his concerts. Wonderful conductor. He was the conductor of the New York Philharmonic in the 70s.
Yep.
He's an incredible mind, but he's radical. Today he's much better. He actually tells in an interview here, yes, at the beginning we really didn't care who was listening. We just did what we wanted. And today I can't, you know, I went to school here, and I went to Yale. Yale Hindemith worked there. There's Cole Porter was there. So there's a lot of, so I took a class to see all these composers, and one of them was Boulez. And when came the final, I listened most of the piece that he does in the book. I couldn't understand this piece. I hate the piece. But I love the man as a conductor. So I wrote in my final, there was something about, I analyzed the piece and I said, this man will be just famous because he's a great conductor, because as a composer he's horrible. And I wrote him, still now my teacher went to see me and said, how did you dare to write? I said, I hate the music, what can I do? But I actually saw a concert of him in London explaining a piece, explaining a Bartók piece, and then playing. And he took a whole part, 30 minutes or 40 to explain, and then the other 40 minutes was the piece.
Right.
I tell you, I left this concert mesmerized. I think I was on Stars. I said, I understood, and he can speak like a child. You understand every single thing. And any person. And there were so many young people in the audience. There was just this huge amount of people starving to learn from the man, and he could do that. So I start to listen to him. See, when the thing becomes personal, then you start, that's why when you like the book, you go listen to the music, because maybe you like the book. So when I start to like Boulez, I start to listen to his music and respect. But what he did, I think when Boulez was dead, he became so precise, everything, because Messiaen was still a little in the role, let's put this in this way. He actually played still a little flexible. Boulez, there was no flexibility.
Right.
No flexibility. Boulez, in his piano sonata, the first and the second, it seems that he's breaking the piano. It's something so scary. And it's actually here when we talk, but I went to hear and said, "Oof, what is that?" And what is I love to say is there is a phrase here that say that I think Virgil Thompson was also an American composer, but most of all a great
Music critic.
Music critic. He was, and sharp. My goodness, he was sharp. And he writes, at some point you might find out that Boulez, being totally scientifical serialist, and Cage, who make music by chance, sound the same. And I have to say, it is true. I actually conduct a chains piece, they call chains piece or aleatory piece. Do you know how they happen? They don't have a normal notation. They have squares. You receive this paper with squares, and he speaks about a little that who invented that. And in the square says, flute, play 10 seconds and put the notes. And after 10 seconds, repeat it again. No, I play this note and repeat for 10 seconds. And then piccolo, plays these 3 notes very slowly. There is no idea of really tempo. And then you have this cube that this square that should last 25 seconds. So you give this group of people who is in the square, boom, and they are playing. They know just the note they have to play, but every performance will be different because depends on the speed of the person. But he says the next square has to start 5 seconds after this one. So my job is not to conduct the instrument, but to be with 1, 2, now, you guys. And then they are, and then you stand by chance. You start to create this picture. It's like to take colors and say this part of the painting, I will throw some painting here. And then you throw on the other side and you don't know really what comes. Do you know? But you know that the color is thought. You thought which color, how to make this color. So it's not really totally random. But it is random as basic idea, as a philosophy. As I should be abstract. Do you know? So it's fascinating to do these kind of pieces because I actually had a lot of fun conducting because I said it was Bernard Ram, who is also a chains composer, aleatory composer, one of the most important. He was still alive when I conducted and he came to the performance. It was very interesting to talk with him about that. And I have to tell you, it sounds by chance, but everything was written. It was not chance. Well, there is a piece here that he tells the place, enter on stage, and then just shout something and tell the other one, but you enter from the other side and you have to try to beat the person. So something like that. And that's real chance.
I knew this was going to happen when we were talking about this book. We're coming close to the hour, and it really does evidence the fact that this book is so rich that you can talk about so much for forever. And I think the invitation is to come to it. And I think what this book also does masterly is it shows us what today we listen to, we hear. You could hear it in a television commercial. You could go to a movie. It talks about Bernard Herrmann, Psycho. It talks about this type of composition in a form that we're accustomed to, that we're watching a movie, where you might have a movie score which would absolutely underscore a moment in time, the emotion, would set you up for dread or something terrible happening, the love themes, things like that, and that we are surrounded by this thing every day. And it talks about jazz. It talks about bebop. Yeah. It talks about all sorts of music and the Beatles.
The Beatles, very
and
important.
Wasn't it in the Sgt. Pepper album? Yeah. There's a picture of Stockhausen, right?
Yeah, because they heard Stockhausen the year before, and they take techniques from Stockhausen for the album, and as a homage, they put actually his picture on front.
One of the other wonderful things, too, I think, and you talk about Messiaen, and there's a whole section talking about the religiosity. There's so much chaos, there's so much turbulence going on in the world, and that these people are finding sense of solace in religion or spirituality. And going and actually listening to the sounds of nature, experiencing the birds, experiencing water, the waves, experiencing the wind through the trees, and then being able to convert that or to express that into music. I thought that was quite wonderful, which really, because, I mean, if you really stop and listen, there's music all around us, you know?
And together noise. Do you know, I think it's really part of our living. I think he's right, Cage is right when say there is actually too much noise. I think we live in that. And I think it's important also that we talk in the interview about the Pierrot Lunaire. I think there is actually today, we grow up with this noise. We are in a century of a lot of noise. It's not strange that someone is born with the need to express something. Use this noise as part of, you know, a sound expression. Because the idea of the word music still put us together is not only in classical music, but in a tonal element. Because even Madonna is tonal. It doesn't change. My tonal means tonality. Even the pop music is still tonal. That's the language we are used. But if you go to a movie, a horror movie, and take away the movie and listen to the music, you are listening to 20th century music, probably the most avant-garde music.
Right.
Do you know, it's very true that, and you can hear this beautiful Ennio Morricone movie from Cinema Paradiso, but you can go to a Hitchcock movie. Do you know? And I saw lately 3 of Hitchcock, and I actually closed my eyes and I heard the music. What a scary music! But you have a reference because this music is part of something you are seeing.
Didn't Bernard Herrmann also, didn't he actually write pieces separate than movie scores? Didn't he do, I'm not sure if it was an opera or another piece, but so he did compose otherwise. We talked in the very beginning about almost coming full circle.
Yeah.
And I think it was quite interesting to see that in this whole evolution here, people who broke away, who wanted to run away many times, friends who had grouped together to create a whole kind of enclave of artistry, got angry and walked away from each other and, you know, to hell with you, I don't want to listen to your music anymore. All of a sudden, the whole evolution is that now, if you listen to, for instance, Philip Glass, and if you haven't approached Philip Glass, you can do it with the score for the hours. You know, a minimalist he's called. But then you start to get this sense of a return to romanticism. Am I right?
Yeah, I would call more a return to tonality.
To tonality.
It's like there is. Actually, Glass had just an opera now at the Met, which actually was a very dear conductor who conducted that.
Really?
Yeah, we worked together for 3 years in the summer. And I'm very glad he is an incredible eye for new music. He does new music all the time. But he was telling that conducting this opera now, it's actually like a normal thing. People listen to this music. It took time until this music became like something, people go to the opera and they are not scared anymore. Remember, when the thing was done 20 years ago, people would walk out.
Run out.
Yeah, run out, if not screaming, which happens in this book, has these 2 great moments. I think many of, The Rite of Spring, when it was done in 1913, was such a big fight in the hall that people screaming, and there are people saying bad words, the other one saying bravo, and they couldn't agree, but they finished the piece, but you barely could hear the piece. Actually, Gertrude Stein was there and writes about that, how was this experience. But eventually also Boulez, in a concert with Stravinsky piece, not the Rite, another piece in France, walk up the stage and they start to beat and scream. And there was all this incredible outburst of thinking differently. But that's what I find is the beauty. I have to say that I agree with him at the end of the book when he said that music today is more heard than any other time in the world. Remember that today everybody has an iPod or has a radio home in the car. You know, you see, I teach at university. When I'm at UMASS, everybody now walks on the street with a headphone. If you go to any campus, everybody is listening some kind of sound, if we want to say it, all the time. So never humankind heard so much sound. And there is another thing that I think we have to say. People said, well, people really loved Brahms, but how many people really heard Brahms at that time? Was people who had money, who could.
Right.
And that was what, 10% of the society? And the rest was noise. because they didn't have access to that. Opera was the only thing that gave access to people. 20th century really creates, like New York. New York is this place that you can hear all kinds of music in one night. You can see people screaming to the beautiful Mozart symphony.
Right.
You know, so because today people have access to that, I think there are many more people listening to Beethoven today than any. It's just because we got so happy about that and we opened 1,000 orchestra. Maybe we don't need 1,000 now, we need just 800 or 700. But 700 is much more than the 100 that was 100 years ago. I think we are listening more to music, and even strange music. But the fact is that this is strange music, as I say. Of course, there will be my family don't hear classical music, and I'm a classical musician, so I live that home. I have my siblings and my parents who don't listen to this music. So music that, like Kate says, many streams go into a delta. You know, today we are many kind of music in one, and some are noisy.
One of the things I think this book is blessed with is a cast of characters that befit an extraordinary novel. Really, and all infused into time frame that we can identify with and maybe understand even a little bit better as it. And you know, the clamoring to go to Hollywood, to write film scores, all this kind of thing is talked about as well. And one of the things that I'm going to invite you to do is, obviously, hopefully you'll read the book, but I did print out in the back a page from Alex Ross's website, okay? Do go there. He has a little video and he talks about it and talks about what music is like for him. But he also, and this is what we were using today, there are all these musical examples that follow through the book so you can actually take your time and experience them.
If you are reading the book especially, every chapter has at least 5 or 6 examples, and you can go there. They are short, but gives you idea if you're talking about Varese, to go there and listen to Varese, you know. So it's actually very helpful, very, very helpful.
I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Wasn't there?
I would like to ask you, if your parents and siblings didn't have the music background, how did you get started in
That's a good, that's the book make me think. Because how these people so started when they had no background, I think it might be a need. And actually Schoenberg went to someone, and he wrote very well, but someone asked, how do you compose that? How do you get to this idea? And he went to the friend and said, I cannot be honest, but it's just an internal need so big that I can't stop myself. And that was music for me. When I heard the first long play, I couldn't stop listening.
You were hooked immediately, right?
I was hooked immediately. My father got worried. Really got worried. He said, why this kid is listening to this music? It was not music. To this music the whole day. So maybe I understand them when they have I'm not a composer and I'm nothing in front of these people, but my love to music was something that's very mine. Nobody never actually, I never heard home, and I never had experience outside. I went for my first concert when I was 14.
And where did they give you piano lessons?
I had to do a deal with my father. He hates sports. So when I was 12, I promised him I would do a sport. And he would allow me to study music. And I pay off the teacher to say that I was coming to the lessons. And I never came. Of course, I hate sports till now. Do you know? But I love music. But he took 2 years to give me a piano. I was 14 when I got my piano. For 2 years, I still study on tables.
And who do you like to play? What's your favorite composers?
Me? Any composer is like food. If you ask me what's the best food, it's whoever cooks very well.
Thank you very much.
I think we do have to wrap it up. I'm sorry, but please come and talk to Lanfranco afterwards. And I thank you very much again for agreeing to be here. And I invite you all out there and go and listen to the noise, okay?
Thank you.